Greetings, innovators and leaders. This is AI for the C-Suite, your compass for navigating the exponential age. I'm Chad Harvey, and we're here to bring you cutting-edge insights on AI tailored specifically for middle market organizations. Buckle up as we embark on a journey through the transformative world of artificial intelligence. My guest today is Rob Wray, a serial entrepreneur who has successfully built and scaled multiple technology companies. Rob founded Whitebox, an e-commerce tech company that leverages data science to optimize advertising and logistics. Under his leadership, Whitebox raised $55 million in VC and grew to over 500 employees across 3 states. Prior to that, he co-founded MP3 Car, which became the world's largest vehicle computing website, as well as Innovative Technology Consulting Corporation, which specialized in healthcare technology integration. Today, Rob serves as a mentor at Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures and also has a shadow AI project named Sopheva, which I'm hoping that if I ask nicely, he'll open up about. Rob brings a unique perspective to our discussion about AI, having worked at the intersection of tech, data science, and business across multiple industries, including healthcare, e-commerce, and logistics. When he's not building companies or mentoring startups, Rob's training for what he calls the centenarian Olympics, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that too. Rob, welcome to AI for the C-Suite.
Thanks for having me.
Really excited to have you here. I'm going to dive right in. You've built multiple successful companies across different technology waves, from healthcare IT in the 90s to vehicle computing in the 2000s to e-commerce and data science with Whitebox in the 2010s. And now with your new project, you're diving into AI. What made this the right time for you to focus on AI?
Well, I was preparing a number of presentations that I was doing and listing out my company history as you just did. And one of the things that struck me as I was building this slide of my company history is I always seem to start companies at a time where there's no manual. Um, and I really learned something about myself building this slide because it kind of struck me. I've been reading a lot about ADHD because I was recently re-diagnosed with it as an adult.
Hmm.
And I think because of my ADHD, I was forced to learn in an atypical way, and typically without a manual. Like, I'm not the type of person, most people go to school in industrial format and crank through a big book and come out the other side and be like, all right, well, here's how I'm going to go apply this. But because I had ADHD, I think that really precluded me from, learning in that format. And I had to go learn by doing in a bunch of other unique ways. And I think that learning style really allowed me to go dig into all these industries. So desktop IT in the 90s, before in the early 90s, then automotive computing in early 2000s, and before the iPad and the iPhone came out, I was working on that project, and then e-commerce. We kind of launched our first e-commerce effort in the late 90s as well. And so all these things really started with no manual. AI has no manual, as you know from working on it. Um, and I think the other thing that got me into AI, aside from me gravitating towards things with no manual, is I had a bit of a health scare
Hmm.
while I was running my third company, and my family has also had a number of run-ins with the healthcare system where it just hasn't been a great experience as a patient. And I decided that on company number 4, I wanted to go do something back in healthcare. And the more I dug into healthcare, I realized how immense these problems are, how complicated they are. And at the same time, I was seeing all this news about AI, and I was like, wow, this could be really powerful to go help solve some of these big healthcare problems. It'll be impactful across all industries, but I think specifically healthcare. So, anyways, those are like the big reasons about why AI. And I just, the other thing is, I thought the last thing is like, it is so powerful of a tool to help you do things that you've never done before. I find it as a just a, like a force multiplier on my thinking power.
Mhm.
Or I've called it an exoskeleton for my brain. And so I just love that. So that's why AI.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and it's interesting you use the term exoskeleton. I've come to think of it as a collaborator in many instances. It's kind of like having a sounding board, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means for you and your shadow venture here in a bit. But I've found that it's a collaborative tool that, when used appropriately, really is that force multiplier. So I love that you're viewing it through that lens. And the other thing you mentioned that I'd be remiss if I didn't call out, you talked about ADHD, and we could probably have an entire episode dedicated to that. In many ways, I know it's a four-letter abbreviation. It's a four-letter word for a lot of folks, yet I believe it's actually a superpower, because so many of the entrepreneurs and the founders and owners that I work with have some level of that. And I think when harnessed and channeled appropriately, which you clearly have learned how to do, it can be an amazingly strong ally or tool in your box, quite frankly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it was just a painful process
Sure.
as a youth, to get to the point where I had built the compensation tools necessary to turn it into. I didn't know how to control the power.
Yeah.
So, and I think as an adult, still, I continue to work on that. But I guess we all do.
Yeah, quite right. Well, you are absolutely right to turn your firepower in the direction of AI, because I don't remember exactly the term you used in answering my question, but it was basically there's no manual, and there isn't, and that's what's so exciting and fascinating about a lot of this. A lot of folks I've talked to in the tech sector are fond of saying even the people that built this technology don't quite know what it's capable of, and that's pretty amazing. That's an amazing statement when you sit back and think about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yep.
all right. So, you're a mentor down at Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures. Are you seeing any AI-related trends or any opportunities there among the startups and inventors that you're working with?
I think there's a massive opportunity. I guess it depends on what you're looking for. And like if your listeners are looking for investment, yes, I think there's a lot of like young startups that are doing really cool stuff that'll be big companies. I mean, most people don't talk about it, but there are billion-dollar companies that are coming out of Baltimore, and certainly more regularly multi-million-dollar companies that are generating nice returns for their investors. And I think Baltimore gets unfairly stacked in the list of other big cities just because we have a smaller name, smaller city. But there's a lot of fun stuff happening out of Hopkins. Like one of the companies that I'm working with, they are using mobile phones to detect strep throat. And so, yeah. And so like, that's typically one of these things where if you have a screaming kid at 6 p.m. on a Friday night, you're going to have to go run to urgent care. And there's 166 million of those strep throat tests that are done manually. You have to get a painful swab of the back of your throat. This is one of those technologies where they can use computer vision to determine how much bacteria is on the tonsil and a number of other factors, and determine with very close accuracy to a lab test, does this patient have strep throat, and allow an instant prescription, of medicine. So I think there's lots and lots and lots of examples like that coming in out of Hopkins, not only just in medicine, but there's other engineering examples of that too.
That that really begs the question in my mind: what size data set do you need to be able to accurately parse and diagnose those types of conditions on the fly using that type of app?
Yeah, I think it depends on the condition and what other details you can get about it. I'm not a data scientist, but I
Yeah,
think I think it depends very much on the condition, and I can't talk about the size of the data set for this company under NDA, but
sure.
I think that there's certainly machine learning companies that have tens of thousands and millions, and there's companies that have much smaller data sets that you can still make if you know how to look at the data and how to label the data
Hmm.
and how to analyze the data. You can do extraordinary things with very small data sets.
Hmm. Very true. I think one of the things that we've started to see as well, there's been a lot of chatter about synthetic data. And I don't know whether you've had an opportunity to play with or interact with any of that, or if you have an opinion on what that means.
Uh, I I can't speak to the science of that, so I'm reluctant to
Yeah.
to get into it too much. I think I'm skeptical on the surface, but I say that from an uninformed viewpoint.
Yeah, fair enough. No, it's funny. You and I have had a number of offline conversations prior to this podcast, and we've had enough discussion for me to know that we think similarly about some things. And I thought you phrased that very well. I'm skeptical, but I don't quite know enough to answer that intelligently. So, well said. That's an answer I would have given myself. All right, let's swing back into territory that you're more familiar with. Given your background in e-commerce and some of the other things that you worked with at Whitebox, how do you see AI transforming the e-commerce landscape?
Oh, I think that every single thing that you can think of will be transformed. And I think this statement doesn't just apply to e-commerce. It's really to all
Mm-hmm.
industries. I think there's certain things that will happen faster than others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's certain things that will take longer. But I think everything's going to be transformed. It's just a question of how long it takes. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I say everything, I mean everything from logistics to customer service to selling to um, like what's the user experience when you're shopping. Um, so I think if we come back and look at this 10 years from now, I think e-commerce will be almost unrecognizable from today versus what we see in 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm. If we're projecting out on that 10-year time horizon, I think I would stand by your initial statement that it's going to change everything. Everything is going to look remarkably different in 2035 from where we stand right now in 2025.
Yeah.
So, all right. Speaking of things that are different, one of the things that you're working on is an advisory board project. Can I say that? Can we
Sure.
talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit? All right.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity, and I really appreciate the fact that you were willing to extend a little bit of a beta test to myself and some other users. Why don't you describe what you're working on and kind of what the genesis was and what this does and where you're hoping it's going to go? And I know that's a great big broad question, but I want to give you a lot of leash and leeway here.
Yeah, so I kind of got interested in the topic uh, of a virtual advisory board because I fell into it actually. And so one of the boards I'm on, the CEO kind of got stumped on a question because we had our revenue was headed up into the right. Everyone was really excited about that. CEO was excited about that. We had three lines of revenue going up into the right, and one of them was flat.
Hmm.
And the CEO hadn't really prepared for that question about why is this front line of revenue flat? And I thought, how cool would it be if he had a virtual board of directors that could grill him on the board deck in advance, where he could upload it to a tool, have computer vision, read the board deck, read the charts, the graphs, the drawings, um, and uh, and just grill him on advance so he was a little bit more prepared. And I thought, what a great opportunity for me to test the limits of some of these off-the-shelf AI systems, just to know where they fail. So when I talk to companies, one of the things I love to tell people to do is go push the thing until it breaks,
Hmm.
because it's much better for it to break when you're doing something not important than when you give it an important task. So push it until it breaks. And so I thought, all right, this is a great opportunity for me to go figure out where it's going to break. Where are the limits? And then I can know where's a safe place to apply it and where shouldn't I. And so if I go build this little tool, I'm going to find out a bunch of different limits and see what happens. So uh, just for context, I haven't written code since the 90s when I wrote some websites when I got out of high school. I wrote some HTML. And I thought, I'm going to go try some of these low code apps where you kind of just connect the dots. I'm just going to try it out. And I tried them and they were terrible. I thought, what if I just go use AI to kind of be my tutor and say, you know what, teach me how to write this in Python. So
Hmm.
sure enough, I just created a Python script and built a working prototype that I could show on my screen. And so I went and actually, my old Vistage coach, he encouraged me to go build a prototype with a couple of his members and see what they thought of it. So I built this thing out, showed it to two people, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, Rob, this is awesome. Can we play with it?" And I was like, "Well." So I'm about 3 or 4 hours in at this point of work. So I've built a functioning prototype of this virtual board in about 3 or 4 hours,
Hmm.
which is pretty astounding considering I haven't written programs since the 90s. Um, and it was HTML. And so, by the way, I'm connecting with Python on my computer via API. And for those of the users that are non-technical, that's basically when one computer talks to another. And so, and you have to use programming code to make one computer talk to another, and you have to authenticate, and it's not a super easy process. So, in a few hours, I've got this program running on my computer with the help of this um, AI tool. And so they said, "Hey, when can we play with this on our desk?" And I thought, well, this is going to be a project, but here we go. And so I ended up rolling up my sleeves and figuring out how to turn it into a web app, which is basically like buying a .com domain name for it and making it so people could go use this virtual board. So it took me about 60 hours to go build this app from a Python script to uh, a virtual board. And then I went and asked my developer friends. I said, "Hey, how long do you think this would take?" And I showed them a system architecture diagram of this because by the time, in order for me to turn it into a web app, I had to build a database, I had to build an email system, I had to go uh, put in some, various security and anyways. So I asked my developer friends, how long would this have taken to do if you put a developer on this? And the general answer was around 500 to 1,000 hours. Um, and so basically in 60 hours, I did a minimum of 500 hours worth of work. And I was like, oh my God. And my wife at this point, I was like working 16-hour days because I was learning so much so fast. And my wife was like, "Rob, we need to get you some help. This isn't normal." Um, and I finally, I couldn't think of a good way to explain it to her. So finally I did the math, and like 60 divided by 500, that's about 7.8. I figured, and so the best analogy I could come up with was like it's the equivalent of you if you could wake up in the morning and have a pair of shoes that let you run at 70 miles an hour, would you probably wouldn't want to stop running around until you got absolutely exhausted. So right now I'm just running around at 70 miles an hour. This will burn itself out soon enough. So yeah, so that's how the whole story of how I got started. And but the real why of like why a virtual advisory board. I mean, I have made so many mistakes in my career. Like at one point, my net worth was like negative $500,000, and I
Hmm.
had to dig out of that. Um, and not too many people want to be your friend when your net worth is negative $500,000. Uh, and so, like, fortunately, I was able to find some advisors to help me. But and then I think back on so many other times in my careers where I've made really, really bad decisions, or I could have been prevented from making bad decisions if I'd have had more help. Not everybody can afford a Vistage coach, um, or a Vistage peer group, and so in addition to me watching this little mistake on the board I was on, uh, mentorship is really, really, really important to me. And I've kind of become fascinated over the past couple of years with mental models. There's a great website run by Shane Parrish called Farnham Street, former intelligence officer that hosts content on different mental models. And so he's hosted everyone from hedge fund traders to Charlie Munger to Daniel Kahneman, uh, like thinkers all over the map. And his whole focus is like, how do we become aware of our own thinking patterns and then use other people's thinking patterns or different thinking patterns to find our own cognitive bias. Or a more simple way to do it would be like if you imagine a horse with the blinders on its side and it can only see straight forward. I think we as CEOs, we often get these blinders on
Hmm.
and we don't see what's happening right here. And sometimes the blinders are here and you can't see what's happening right in front of your face. I've done that many times. Um, and so I thought, how cool would it be if we had a tool that helped people automatically find some of that cognitive bias, those horse blinders, and remove them. Um, and this is not a new idea. Like uh, Alfred Sloan, chairman of General Motors, was probably the most famous person to start practicing this. I think the story goes that at one point he had his entire leadership team, everyone um, was all in agreement that they needed to go do this thing. And he was like, wait a minute, something's wrong here if nobody disagrees. I want one
Hmm.
person to go out of this room, think about this, and then come back in and argue the counterpoint. And so that kind of became famous in the business world as the devil's advocate strategy. Before that, Abraham Lincoln did this with when he won the election, he brought on his cabinet all of his political rivals to help him think differently. And so ultimately, I think there's an opportunity using AI to build a tool to fundamentally change the way in which leaders make decisions.
Hmm. I love the shout out to Vistage and to peer advisory, and clearly that's had a formative impact on you and the way that you've been thinking about this and the idea of kind of democratizing access to a peer advisory group. I also would be remiss if I didn't highlight that productivity metric that you threw out there at the very beginning of your explanation, which was 60 hours, and you went to your developer friends, and it was basically, well, it would have taken us 10 times that amount of hour or manpower, if you will. And that's a metric that I keep coming back to time and time again, because when folks ask, okay, well, what is the multiplicative power of these tools? I often say, well, I think it's 8 to 10x. And that is definitely in the ballpark of my unscientific judgment there. So,
Yeah, so I'm looking at a deck that I have here. So Boston, there was a study that a Wharton professor, one of my favorite writers on AI, Ethan Malik, I think they did
yep.
a review with Boston Consulting Group, and when they compared consultants with AI versus no AI, they completed 12% more tasks and 25% faster.
Mm,
So there's a different number. Either way,
yeah.
like that's still an enormous leverage.
It's astounding. It's absolutely astounding. And when I give talks, I often refer to this as the cognitive industrial revolution. And I can't claim that I coined that term. I've heard it flying around in other circles as well. It is very much akin to when we developed steam power and when we developed mechanized power and got away from manual power and horsepower, if you will. So really, just fascinating possibilities that get unlocked. But let's go back to your virtual advisory board here.
Yeah.
How does this work? Walk me through. What does this look like? I'm looking for some feedback on something. How well formulated does the question that I have in my mind need to be, and how's this process play out?
Yeah, so the way it works now, it's gone through a number of iterations, but the way it works now, um, you're familiar with the issue processing way that Vistage happens. And for those of your listeners who've never been to a Vistage meeting, Vistage has this really powerful tool that they do with their members, where if you've got an issue that's come up in the company, you can run it by your peers for feedback. It
Mm-hmm.
might be, oh my gosh, I am having this personnel problem and I can't figure out how to motivate this person, or I'm torn between these two candidates, or I have this legal issue that's come up, or I've written my 2025 plan and I want feedback. A lot of times, Vistage acts as a board of directors for people that don't have boards.
Mm-hmm.
And so the issue processing thing is a way to just get feedback from your peers. But as with any advisor, especially your peers, the way to get the best advice is to write a little bit down. Most people are reluctant to do this, but it's such an important step. For example, if you just say, "Oh my gosh, I can't motivate my CFO. My CFO, no matter what, I've told them that they need to do this. They're not doing this. I just can't motivate them." Right? But if you go were to write a document and say, hey, here's the things that I've tried. Here's why this is important. If this isn't successful, here's what happens. Anyways, that context I think is really important to get good feedback from your peers. So that's the first step, is to write something up about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be something really quick. You could just write, I'm having problems with my CFO, and my system will coach you on, hey, let's add a little bit more meat to this. The next step, um, uh, after maybe you improve your issue a little bit, the next step is you can hit a button and it says the system will go out and pick the world's best board members for you, or advisory board members for you, alive or dead. And so it might be that you end up with Jeff Bezos on your board, Abraham Lincoln, Angela Merkel, Annie Duke, fill in the blank. Uh, and there's a handful of built-in advisors, or you can kind of hit the button and get suggested advisors. And then I generally recommend at least 3 advisors, up to 5. Any more than that, it gets noisy. But basically, once you hit the button, then you go into like an advisory board discussion with these people. And you could be having a discussion with Abraham Lincoln and Jeff Bezos. And maybe Abraham Lincoln would say, well, back when I was trying to negotiate this particular thing, one of the, and so there will be historical a historical relation to what Abraham Lincoln was going through at that particular time, as it if possible, as it relates to the issue that you're going through. Or Jeff Bezos might say, well, when we were growing Amazon, I had a similar problem, and here's how I handled it in Amazon. And then you might say, well, you know what? That's not enough. I want feedback from Ben Horowitz. Let's see what Ben Horowitz would say about this. And he's like, you know what? I agree with a little bit of what Abraham said and a little bit what Jeff said. I kind of would think we should, but I really disagree with this. I'd suggest a more balanced approach between these two advisors. So you end up with like, I think this back and forth and slight disagreement between the advisors creates this, and watching how the sausage is made, like watching these people go, and you can sometimes they'll ask questions. So like I'd feel more comfortable giving you advice on this if I knew um, what your CFO's equity position was. I don't know. I'm making something up, right?
Yeah.
And then you can respond to Jeff Bezos and tell them what the equity position is and how long before that stock vests, and then you'll get an update from Jeff once you've answered Jeff's question.
Hmm.
Um, I think one of the problems that all of these models have is that they've kind of melted together the entire world's knowledge into one personality, and
Hmm.
our own personal biases and our own personal viewpoints are often, and our own differences and you know individual quirks are really kind of like the spark of humanity. And I think
Mm.
by personifying some of these advisors, it deliberately injects bias back into the model. Um, and then when you watch the fireworks from that bias, that's kind of where you start to really augment some leadership thinking.
I, it's so fascinating to me. I wrote down two words as you were talking: friction and perspective. And you used the word fireworks, whereas I used the word friction. But that is so true. And as you very eloquently stated, as we distill all the knowledge of the world down, it becomes not homogenized necessarily, but that singular voice is not useful. And so the ability to go back and channel individual voices to create that friction or those fireworks and to get that perspective from a more meaningful dialogue is great. And I think as long as Abraham Lincoln doesn't recommend that you suspend habeas corpus, everything's okay in board director land, right?
Right.
So, what are some of the more interesting opinions that you've seen the virtual advisory board render or come up with when issues are presented to them? Does anything stick out or anything come to mind?
Oh, there have been so many things that I've been like, wow, I cannot believe it just said that. Uh, um, and so some of it is around my own issues. Some of it's where just watching other people process their issues. So let me think. I think that the first wow moment for me was when I started watching the advisors argue with one another.
Hmm.
Um, and or people taking balanced opinions, which is what one thing I already mentioned. But to list something specific, I was thinking about a pricing strategy. I've used the tool to build itself. I've
Hmm.
kind of now at the point where the tool's helping me build itself.
Hmm.
And so so what does that mean? That means help me build the investor deck, help me improve the UI and the UX. So basically I've uploaded all the screenshots of the application and said, hey, how do I make the UI and the UX better? And I've please invite the world's best UI and UX experts to review this, and then have them come in and grill me on it. And some of the feedback from those sessions, I'm like, wow, I should really do that. And sure enough, I implement it and I like it. So, uh, uh, other examples were pricing strategy, right? I'm trying to work on eventually I'm going to need to charge some money for this, but I'm going to keep working on it.
Hmm.
Because if I can charge some money, then I can bring in some smart data scientists and some security experts, um, which I think is going to be needed for the next step. Um, I, I said, what pricing strategy should I go with? And I just love the dialogue back and so I think I used for that particular dialogue. I think I had Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, and Annie Duke. And Annie Duke's a famous poker player who became a behavioral psychologist, and like I think I'm trying to remember where she's a professor and like an advisor to hedge funds. Anyways, it was just she's like, I recommend. So it was kind of interesting to say like, well, you need to go charge this amount. And then Annie say, well, let's split the pricing here. And so she recommended a more nuanced pricing strategy where I could test multiple tiers of pricing that I don't think I would have gotten that type of output had I just uploaded my press release and said, hey, here's the app I'm building. How should I price this? Um, and so that's just one example of dozens that I've just been blown away with.
I'm
Like
really.
we had one customer that used it to negotiate a $10 million M&A deal. Um, and just like, hey, how do my buyer's doing these shenanigans here. How do I move this forward and not blow up the deal?
This is fantastic. The example that you gave, I think, lends itself to what I'm going to say here next. And I can't remember if we surfaced this in our conversation here today or if it was in a prior discussion, but you talked about being a fan of Ethan Mollick. And I can't recall whether it's Ethan Mollick or Azim Azar. One of those two has posited that the rise of AI is going to lead to the first billion-dollar company that does not have significant numbers of staff or really any staff outside of the founder. And as you're talking about using this tool to improve the product that you've built and the company that you're launching, that immediately came to mind. Now, I'm not predicting or saying you're going to be the first billion-dollar, one-employee company. However, we don't know what the future holds, and I think the path that you're on is very illustrative and should be eye-opening for our listeners and for anybody that's paying attention to this technology about what the potential holds.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I mean, I used this to write a patent for a medical product that I was working on 6 months ago, and I wrote the bones of the patent, but a patent that would have normally cost $28,000, I wrote a solid draft of it with charts, graphs, diagrams, sent it over to my patent attorney, had them review it for a couple hours, and so it was less than $1,000 to what would have otherwise been a $28,000 patent. Like the design piece. So like, there's so many things about where I think it's Sam Altman. I think is the one who several people have said that. I know Sam Altman said it. I don't know if Ethan Mollick said it, but that they have a running bet about when the first one person $1 billion company is going to come up. But I used to think that was BS until I built this product, and I think in the talks that I've given on this since I've built it, I actually call this a bit of a fart app. As impressive as it sounds, the reason I call it that, this is I'm borrowing from an investor friend of mine in Boston. But there's a lot of fart apps today out in AI that just do something really basic.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like back when the smartphone came out, nobody could figure out what to do with it. Mm-hmm. Everyone was like, what do I do with this? All I want to do with my phone is make calls and maybe send some text messages. And so app developers made fart apps, right? Because they couldn't think of how to use it. And the really brilliant innovators said, oh my gosh, this is going to revolutionize the taxi industry. Mm. And so the people that could see beyond the fart apps and say, this is going to revolutionize the taxi industry, those were the people that did well, and the businesses that had that type of perspectives were the ones that survived, and those that didn't, have really struggled. And we're going to see that pattern again, except this time it's going to be much quicker.
So what I just heard you do is issue a challenge to all entrepreneurs and tech developers everywhere: don't build fart apps.
Right. That's right. Yes. Don't do that. Absolutely. and I think also, like, challenge yourself where, like, if you don't go put yourself out of business, your competitor will. Mm-hmm. Like, if you don't put your current business model out of business, your competitor is going to do it for you.
Yeah. That is such a hard thing for any company, let alone middle market, privately owned companies, to wrap their head around, the idea of cannibalization and putting yourself out of business. I think there's this idea that we're going to scale and we're going to operationalize and we're going to grow and then everything's going to be great. Well, maybe not.
Right. Yeah, I think for people that are fortunate enough to have a strong leadership team, I even advocate, like, if you've got a strong leadership team, or even if it's not so strong and medium, and you can just go disappear, I kind of recommend that, that CEOs quit and become their own chief AI officer and figure out, like, okay, how do we integrate this? Mainly because there's no manual. So just because you go hire an IT person or a programmer doesn't mean they're going to do a great job at this. That doesn't, and they could actually do a terrible job because you, as the CEO, know where it's okay. What we were talking about before about where things break.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you, as the CEO, know where it's okay to take risks and know where it's not okay to take risks of like, we absolutely need a human in the loop over here. But this task over here, if that fails 5% of the time, 10% of the time, that's okay. But we're going to save 30% of our costs if we replace this task with AI, or we're going to make this much better of a customer experience. And so I think it's really painful. It's a really painful learning curve to start to understand these systems. But those only the leaders that fully embrace this, I think, will be here to tell the story in 10 years,
Mm-hmm. You've
maybe even
surf,
5.
yeah. The rate of change is scary, especially if you're paying close attention to what's happening. And you've surfaced an issue that's near and dear to my heart, which is that AI should not be the sole purview or even the main purview of the IT department. I loved how you phrased that the CEO needs to step out and become the chief AI officer, because this is a technology that is a general purpose technology, and it can't be just the sole domain of the programmers, the developers, the CIO, the CTO, anybody in that branch of the C-suite. It is much broader than that and much more profound.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. It touches everything.
yeah, so well said. What other advice would you give to C-suite execs that are looking to implement AI solutions while managing organizational change? I thought your advice about CEOs stepping out to become the chief AI officer is directly on point. Any other sage advice or observations in that realm?
I think that uh, uh, so Ethan Mollick, who we've talked about, his piece of advice is go spend 10 hours
Mm-hmm.
with AI systems. I like that advice, but I would add to it one more and say go spend 10 hours on something that you love.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be like, what is your absolute favorite part of the business? And if you can't, if you're really burned out with your business, don't go work on your business. Go, let's say you like cooking, right? Start using AI to go cook stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like for example, I had a buddy coming over the other day. I was cooking some eggplant, and I'm like, I want to do this a little differently. So I get out my phone. I take a picture. I've got about 100 spices on my spice rack, and I'm like, I'm grilling some eggplant today. Here's the oils that I have in my cabinet, and here are the spices that I have. How would I cook this differently? And sure enough, in 3 seconds, I get a recipe that's back out, and I cook it, and it was spectacular. Um, and so that's a really, really basic example. It might be, hey, I want to go build a music app, or I want to go help my child understand something, or I don't know. I find something that you're like super, super passionate about, where you'd be more likely than not to beat your head into a brick wall until you get success. Like I think if you were to think back in your career of and I'm sure we all can do this, of something where uh, you wanted to give up, but you didn't, and you just kept going and going and going, and you had to push through until you finally learned something. I think that because there's no manual here, especially for people that are used to learning with the manual, this is going to be really hard for those people. And so,
Mm-hmm.
therefore, I think it's really important to find something that you love, build some self confidence, figure out how to use the tools, then try to do the next harder thing and the next harder thing, and maybe something that you don't like as much, you don't care about the particular topic, but you want to do it because it's going to help your customers or help you save a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe help you. Maybe you've got a great employee that's stuck doing this monotonous work, and you want to relieve this employee of this monotonous work and then have them be able to go add value to another area of the organization. I don't think that this needs to be about, removing headcount. And I think if you
Mm-hmm.
make it about removing headcount, people are going to be scared and you're going to not have innovation happening.
Mm-hmm.
This is about providing a better customer experience and making a more resilient organization. And I think like another Ethan thing is like he calls people that are working on AI quietly secret cyborgs, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
who knows how AI is going to change your organization, everybody around you, and people don't talk about it because they're afraid they're going to be asked to go work more, or they're going to be fired if people learn out that the AI is helping them do their job, right? So I think that's go read Ethan's blog for
Yeah.
some other leadership ideas about how to deploy this and not make people scared.
Yeah. No, I think that's very solid advice, and I would always recommend folks take a look at Ethan's work. He prolifically posts on LinkedIn, sometimes 6 or 8 times a day, and he swears he does it all himself. So it's impressive. He's a cyborg himself.
That's right.
Let me ask you this, because I think you've got a really unique perspective as somebody that's raised a lot of venture capital in prior life, and also is working with startups in startup land right now. There's a ton of money flowing into AI focused startups and into AI initiatives right now. What do you think in terms of metrics or maybe factors that investors should be looking at when they're evaluating different AI projects that come across their desk?
Um, I think that um, it's mainly about the team, to be
Mm,
honest. I mean, I think it's I think it's two things. It's the team, and also like how are they thinking? Are they thinking out several moves ahead of where like where are the AI systems going to be in 6 months to a year from now?
mm-hmm,
And where's this product going to be? And having good answers for those types of questions. Nobody has a crystal ball about where things are going to be in 6 months to 2 years from now, but
mm-hmm,
having thought out a good answer to that about here's what we see happening, here's why we think that's going to happen, and here's our strategy to win in that scenario. Um, and then the underlying personality traits to go execute on that.
mm-hmm.
So I think if I was making lots of active investments, that's kind of how I'd be scoring things.
I love the fact that you brought it back to people and not about the technology. I think that speaks volumes right there. And I have been coming to the conclusion over the last 2, 3 years that AI is going to enable us to be more human, not less human. I think it can be, you used the word a force multiplier earlier in our conversation. I think it can also be an amplifier for what it means to be a better human and to be a better leader. And I think that's a lot of what your advisory board application is all about.
Yeah, one of the reasons I kind of paused, I was deep into medical stuff for like 2 years. One of the
Mm,
reasons I paused some of my deep efforts on medical work were that a lot of um, what has to change in medicine is our own psychology in order for us to
mm,
have better preventative healthcare. Because we all know we need to sleep better, eat better, exercise more, maybe drink a little bit less alcohol if people drink alcohol. Um, but we don't go do those things, right? And so I kind of one of my things that I think will happen in the very near future is we'll all go be able to have a PhD level psychologist in our pocket.
mm-hmm,
And that kind of gets back to your point of AI will help us be a better person. And so like, how do you get rid of that that like keyboard warrior cortisol response? Like, I can't believe my neighbor just said this, and then you're all amped up and then you counterattack and now your neighbors get like whatever, right? So like I think for people to be able to get out of that, I think that I think that will be a very positive. There's going to be a lot of bad things that people do with AI, but I think
yeah.
overall there will be good things, and that's one of them.
No, I think that's well said. We didn't dive deeply into the name of your application or how people can get to it or to connect with you, and we did that on purpose. So I'm going to kind of leave it to you as we're getting ready to conclude our conversation here in the next couple minutes. If folks are interested, should they reach out to you directly? Is there a website you'd like to send them to? How would you like to?
Yeah, so if anybody wants to go try the app, I'd love some feedback. The only condition, like right now, it's really like an alpha version that has lots
Mhm.
of bugs because I'm updating it all the time, and so it's not going through like a full QA process. So anybody that wants to go test it, they can go to sopheva.com, where the name came from. Uh, Sophia is the Greek word for deep wisdom, and evolved. So Sopheva is spelled Sopheva for knowledge evolved. Um, and so you can go to sopheva.com and check it out. My only request would be uh, that you maybe reach out to me on LinkedIn with any feedback as you go to use it, or there's a team account. You can go to reply to team at sopheva.com. Just tell me how to make it better. And yeah, you can upload up to 100 pages of a board deck or whatever issue you're working on and get feedback from the world's best virtual thinkers.
Very cool. Rob, I really appreciate your time here today and the fact that you were able to share some insights with us. I really enjoyed this conversation. As we sit here, in full disclosure, we're recording this episode here at the very beginning of 2025. Is there anything, as you're sitting here at the beginning of 2025, that you're very excited about or looking forward to in the world of AI? Because I think you keep your finger on the pulse of what's hot and what's happening. So what are you looking forward to over the next 12 months?
I am most looking forward to the compounding effect of everyone being able to learn and create faster.
Mm.
And I think it's really hard for us to imagine what this means for humanity. Like there's a student, a couple favorite examples. There's a student in Waterloo that built a fusion reactor in his dorm room using $2,000 worth of parts. Like
Yes.
another one is like a buddy of mine is working at NASA and using generative AI to go build parts for spacecraft and so they're able to go launch missions that they would have never been able to launch before because they wouldn't have been able to build these parts because they were too heavy. But now AI is helping people think in different ways about how to build parts. And I think that I'm excited for breakthroughs in medicine. And I think even in a year, we're going to start to see the early, signs of that. We're already starting to see it now. And I think it's just going to become much more apparent even in the next year.
I agree. And I don't think that there are as many naysayers today as there were even 3 or 4 months ago that are willing to argue against the point that you just made. I would go so far as to say that our species is at an inflection point and that what comes next is going to be dramatically different qualitatively and quantitatively for a lot of us than what came before.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. All right, Rob. I know that you gave out the Sopheva data. For anybody that wants to learn more about your work or get in touch with you, connect with you on LinkedIn, is that the best way?
Sure, that's probably the best way. Yep.
All right. We'll continue to pad the Microsoft coffers. So thank you so much. Any parting words of wisdom or anything I didn't ask you today that you wish I had asked you?
No, I would, well, other than just saying, go dive in and go try and break some things and be creative about deploying this in your life.
I love it. Creative destruction. Go to it. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. All right. That's a wrap here, folks. Thank you all for tuning into AI for the C-Suite, where we're committed to helping middle market leaders thrive during the exponential age. If you found value in today's discussion, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on all the socials except the dumpster fire that is X, and visit our site, aiforthecsuite.com. Join us next time as we continue to unlock the potential of AI for your organization. And until then, keep your algorithms running, your leadership evolving, and your AI in check. Take care, everybody.